Hey it's TDA and welcome back to my Satisfactory 1.0 Masterclass. In each episode I'll give you one specific goal to work towards that you should ideally be able to complete in 1 or 2 sittings. This episode is going to be all about preparing for the endgame, so I'm going to assume that you have phase 3 elements in production. As you can see, I have as well, and it means it's a perfect moment to start preparing for phase 4 and beyond. And you're going to have to build a lot during those phases, so you might as well make sure you have all the tools available to make that not suck, because honestly, it's going to take quite a bit of building. But speaking of building, the FICSIT Blueprints Mark II make that a lot easier, so that's the thing you should be picking up now. The Mark II Blueprint Designer is exactly the same, or at least works exactly the same as the Mark I, but it's just slightly bigger. It's 5x5 rather than 4x4 foundations, which just allows you to do a little bit more. But if you're watching this and you don't have the Mark II available yet, you can actually do everything I'm going to show you in the Mark II as well. You'll just need to size things down a little bit here and there. So as you can see over here, the Mark II Blueprint Designer is slightly bigger than the Mark I. It's 5x5x5 rather than 4x4x4. Now, you might think, is that really such a big of a difference? And actually it is for some of the larger buildings that just don't fit quite as well into the Mark I. But you can do most of the things I'm going to show you actually in the Mark I Designer as well. So if you are watching this and you don't have the Mark II yet, you might still be able to take advantage of most of the things I'll be showing you. As a side note, this is completely optional, but I like making kind of a blueprint factory in my main base as well, with all these towers around that make it really easy to view it from all different angles, build from all different angles, and well, just makes it look good. Okay, so the first step of making some nice blueprints is a floor. It's very simple. I typically use the 2-meter foundations as my floor, just covering the entire designer in it, just to make sure the buildings actually have a little bit of solidity to it. They look a little bit more sturdy than if you use the 1-meter foundations. But if you want to use those, of course, go ahead. I do think typically the 4-meter foundations as a floor just look a little bit too bulky, but that's completely aesthetics, so it's up to you. Now, as you might have guessed, this is going to be our logistics floor in the blueprints. So basically what I'm doing is I am raising the second floor 2 foundations high. So I have 2 foundations of 4 meters, so 8 meters in total. And then another 2-meter foundation on top of that to form a floor. Now, if you're in the Mark II Designer, you actually have a little bit of extra space. So if you want, you can raise your floor all the way up with 3 foundations, so 12-meter high. That gives you a lot of extra space to work with. It also really adds some additional verticality to your buildings, which you may or may not like. You don't necessarily need the space, I believe. So this is completely an aesthetics choice, so it's up to your own preference. Personally, I'm going to go with a 2 foundation high floor and just complete the entire thing and save this as a blueprint. Might seem a little bit lame to save a blueprint like this, but trust me, it's going to be useful to make some more blueprints efficiently. Then you can empty the Blueprint Designer again and make a basic layout with various different type of machines. For example, I have a very basic layout here with smelters. You can fit a lot more smelters than this actually in a Mark V one, but I'm liking the number 8 for pretty much all the basic buildings. Why? Because it turns out a even number, so first of all it's symmetric, so that's nice. But on top of that, you need a total of 16 smelters for most of the nodes. So, or at least a multiple of 8, let's put it like that. So this is why a blueprint with 8 smelters is going to be universally useful. Similarly, with constructors and assemblers, the number 8 works very well as well. Now, the reason why we're making this over here is because this actually makes it really easy to lay it out on top of our previous blueprint. So the main reason why we just build it on an empty floor is now we can actually take that build and place it exactly where we want. You can press H, you can nudge it to the side a little and center it wherever you want on the floor. You could do this straight away. If you are a lot better builder than I am, you might be able to exactly know where you want it to be and how things will line out. But if you're not, and you find out that you build it, let's say over here, and you're like, it should have been just a few meters to the side. You actually need to take everything out and build it all over again. While if you build it on the empty floor like I just did, all you need to do is just paste it in, nudge it a few meters to the side, and you're good to go. Then once you have it placed where you want, you can start in adding the smaller details. So I have floor lifts over here that are connected to the ground floor. I have set up my usual power system. Now I recommend that if you try and copy my builds, that you place 5 of these pillars on top of each other, because some of the buildings are a lot higher than these, and this just makes sure you can easily combine these different builds, and it will look very clean and laid out nicely. So this is basically a height of 20 meters, or again 5 of these pillars. You can see I did the power stuff a little bit differently this time around, just because I didn't like the power lines going all the way from up top. So I just have a bar here in the middle that connects all these smelters up. Now there's something else I want to show you, apologies for that. Here on the ground floor, make sure you set up all the mergers and things like that. I like setting up a lift to the floor like this, not because I'm actually going to use it, but as soon as you hook this up to inputs, you can check if the outputs are coming out here. If not, then you did something wrong. While building, I can just remove this as soon as I know where the items are going to go, but in the meanwhile this serves as an easy reminder that there is an untapped type of resource here, ready to be used somewhere else in the factory. On a different note, if you want to be a little bit conservative with your resources, you can actually set up these pre-aligned builds with lower tier builds wherever you can. So for example, I have this smelter all the way in the back that's connected over here. I know that no smelter is going to be producing anything more than 60 items per minute, so I have a Mark 1 belt connecting it to the next one. Now the next one is going to add some more stuff to that, so this second is actually going to be a Mark 2 belt, and then once I start connecting things up, I'm going to need a Mark 3 belt to combine everything. But in general, this belt will never carry more than 120 items per minute, so I'm using Mark 2 belts rather than, let's say, Mark 3 or Mark 4, what we have available now. Alternatively, if you don't want to risk using the wrong type of belt, or you're just lazy and you want to use the higher tier because it will always work, then there's nothing wrong with just using the tier 3 or 4 ones everywhere. Just keep in mind that you're going to be spending a lot more resources while building your factory that way. Now, of course, keep in mind that depending on what you're actually producing, you might need to fiddle around with some of the belts when you're actually using this blueprint. Let's say you are making screws, my favorite type of item, then you're probably going to want an individual belt for each output, but generally speaking, this is the layout that you're going to be using, so just set it up for that and you can always just adjust it easily whenever it just quite doesn't fit whatever you're producing. Alternatively, if you really want, you can also make this different versions of the same layout to pre-adjust for that, although typically I find that that's a little bit more work than it's worth. So once you decided on how you are going to design your factory and the type of layout that you're going to be using, all you need to do is just rinse and repeat this process for every type of building you have available. So for example, over here you can see my layout for the constructors. I have 8 constructors over here. Now again, you are not going to need necessarily 8 constructors everywhere in your factory, so you can use this same blueprint to make variants of it, so make one with 4 constructors or 6 constructors or whatever you want. However, what you can also do is just use the one with 8 constructors and then underclock if you don't need that many. That's actually going to save you power compared to having less buildings. It is going to take up a little bit more space, but it's super convenient and easy to do, so it completely depends on how you like to move forward. But it's very viable just to have one blueprint for every type of building. Also, don't forget that if you make a certain layout that you really like for example I just did for the constructors, then you might as well just save that as a building block for new blueprints as well. Now, if you want to keep your logistics floors a little bit cleaner than what I've been doing so far, then this is the moment to design your blueprints around that. So for example, you could go for something like this. This is a setup for the assembler, and those require 2 inputs of course. So I have 1 input coming on the upper belt over here, and then I have a lift getting the inputs from a lower belt over here. It makes it a lot easier to tell what is actually being supplied, where the items are actually going. There is a problem, or it could be a problem for you if you don't like clipping, that these lifts are actually going to transport the items through this belt. So it's not a perfect solution, but hey, there's a solution for that as well if you want. So let me show you an alternative using my favorite blueprint of them all, the manufacturer blueprint. In a Mark II designer, you can actually fit 2 of these manufacturers side by side. And as you can see, I actually laid out the belts in a little bit of an interesting shape. So these belts are actually going to go into the floor at a different vertical, horizontal width, as you can say. Not just all next to each other like we've been doing so far most of the time, but I'm just spacing them out a little bit. Not only does that look very nice, but it also allows you to do something nice on the bottom floor. So as you can see over here, I have the different splitters all connected up, and all the belts are completely non-clipping. Now, of course, if you do add incoming belts as well, if you need a very high input item, but usually that's not the case with manufacturers, you might need to cross some of these belts. But generally speaking, this should work very well. I have 4 different inputs on the sides over here going into the manufacturer, and there's 0 clipping whatsoever. Now, as you can see, I did have to move to the side a little bit because I made an aesthetic choice here to actually continue the beams down below as well, and they were sticking through, so I need to form the belt around that. Now, I'm going to show you why you want these beams to go through the ground floor as well. Some of you might have already guessed where this was going, but in case you didn't, this is why you want these blueprints. First of all, you need to set up one wherever you want to start your factory, and you can select that blueprint again, switch to the blueprint build mode, and then you can just snap on a new blueprint like this. You can even do this vertically as well, so let's say we want to make a whole bunch of smelting, then all we need to do is this. My game is lagging a little bit because of all of the building, but there you go. As you can see, we just set up a huge amount of smelting capacity, and thanks to the beams going through, this looks completely realistic and supported. Of course, you might want to add in some walls and things like that to make it look even better, but this just took me like 5 seconds to build. All I need to do is now hook up some miners and things like that, and then we have a factory good to go already. You can also see why I decided not to completely fill the entire blueprint with machines, mostly because that actually allows me to have some space in my factory to get around as well. You might actually want to make blueprints with just empty floors as well, and maybe not like 5 by 5, but maybe like 1 by 5 or something like that you can put in between of these blueprints, just so you have some more walkway space to get around as well. Maybe even include a blueprint with a stairs in it. Depends a little bit on how far you want to go with that, but that's definitely something you can do, and then you can basically just build a factory out of Lego bricks that you pre-designed, and that is going to save you a massive amount of time, because who wants to focus hours on building smelters when we are at this point probably already 40 or 50 hours into the game, if not more. Oh, and before I forget, because I realize not everyone might know this, let's say you place down a blueprint and you're like, no, it should have been the other way around. Don't worry, you don't have to manually delete everything. Again, there's a blueprint mode for that as well. You can just take it out like that, and then you can place down a new blueprint in like that and just flip it around if you needed to. Don't forget to do this with the larger buildings as well, especially if you have the Mark II designer available, because thanks to the additional space you have, you can actually fit these in quite nicely, even if you include a logistics floor. So things like refineries typically take quite a while to set up, because you need to do all the stuff on the ground floor, as you can see over here. Now, I did leave out the bottom of the floor over here, just because I didn't have the space. Again, these things are ridiculously tall, but this will save you, well, hours of time if you were doing this manually before. Speaking of hours, you might also want to spend a couple of hours completing the rest of the MAM tree. So, for example, there's going to be a couple of very useful things in here that you can now unlock. For example, the gas mask for some further exploring. However, the probably most important thing that you want to unlock at this point, if you haven't done so yet, is unlocking the alien technology production amplifier. Unlocking this allows you to put Somersloops into your machine to increase the outputs by a multiplier of 2. So actually you get twice as much output for the same input. So if you do that with your enemy remains, for example, you get 2 alien protein rather than 1. And if you put a Somersloop in the next machine as well, you can turn those 2 alien proteins into 4 alien DNA capsules. So you actually get 4 DNA capsules out of that for every single remain you put in. Why am I highlighting this? Well, it's a very easy way to get a lot of coupons going, because you don't actually need a lot of DNA points to unlock one, and multiplying all the creatures you kill by 4 basically is going to allow you to very quickly get some coupons if you need them. Another very popular way to use this is by using a Somersloops to increase the amount of power shards you get out of your slugs. So you can turn one slug into 2 power shards now, or the higher tiers for their equivalent amount as well. So it's basically going to allow you to overclock a lot more buildings. However, my personal favorite is to use the Somersloops in the highest tier item that you're producing. So for example, over here I have the manufacturer making adaptive control units, which is an insanely expensive thing to make. So multiplying that by 2 not only actually increases the amount of stuff I'm getting from that by a hefty amount, but it's also effectively doubling the size of my factory without actually doubling the size of the factory. So it's an insane way to increase your production while saving power and not having to build a massive factory. Now, of course, at some point we might not want these adaptive control units anymore, and I can just take the Somersloops out again and put them into another machine whenever I want them. So just keep track of where your Somersloops are actually being used, and again, keep in mind that you only have a limited number of them, so you can't just multiply everything in your factory. Don't rely on them too much, but it's insanely useful, and that also makes these things extremely valuable for your production. Of course, there's also going to be a couple of things that are a little bit less exciting, but still very useful, like increasing the amount of tools that you can carry around by making use of the various upgrades available in the MAM tree. Also, I would highly recommend just completing everything in the Caterium tree, because honestly, all of these things are extremely useful to have. Specifically, you have the geothermal generator at this point available, which is just free energy. In order to use these geothermal generators, you're going to need to find some of these hot springs like I have over here. These are actually very close to our starting base if you're playing along, so make use of them. Again, it's one of the reasons I picked this location. And what these things do is just basically draw the heat from the earth and give you power in return. So this is actually going to vary in terms of the production between 200 megawatts and 600 megawatts. You can see it fluctuating up and down. So I would treat this as a kind of a free power plant that is producing 200 megawatts. But if you do want to use the surplus, all you need to do is build a couple of batteries. They will absorb the overflow that you get like here, and then discharge it again. So you can actually kind of average out your production, in this case around 400 megawatts. It will still fluctuate up and down, which is not ideal. You might see your factory shutting up every now and then, but you can go that way if you want. Keep in mind that not every of these geothermal generators is going to produce quite as much. So one of them is on a pure node, I believe, and this one is on a lower tier node. So this is only going to produce 100 megawatts up to 300. But again, it's free power, and it's always going to be producing. It doesn't depend on anything else, so you might as well take advantage of that. There is also the power augmenter in the alien technology tree as well. It costs a Somersloop to unlock, but it's going to be worth it. Not only is this one of the best looking buildings in the game, just look at that. It's also one of the most expensive buildings in the game, because you're going to need 10 Somersloops in order to build it. So you need to think about whether or not you want to do this before you do so. Of course, you can always just delete the building, but just keep it in mind when you do it. This is actually going to be producing a whole lot of power, because by itself, the power augmenter already produces 500 megawatts, which is, well, quite a decent amount, but it's also going to boost the production of your entire network by 10%. So you can see that we just went up from a little over 5,000 to over 6,000, because it first adds 500 megawatts from itself, and then it takes the entire production of the chain and increases that production by 10%. So this thing by itself is already producing more than 1,000 megawatts of power, and that power is actually going to increase once we start adding more fuel facilities and things like that to it, because that is also going to be boosted by 10% as well. So long story short, the power augmenter does exactly what it says on the tin. It's going to augment your power by a whole bunch, but it does come at a price. So if you want to use those Somersloops for boosting your production, you might want to keep a couple of them in reserve. Of course, that means you might want to do some exploring around the map to get yourself a whole bunch of stuff. So for example, I've done a couple of hours of exploring, got a whole bunch of hard drives, some more spheres, some Somersloops, and a whole bunch of slugs. So I can now start boosting my production whenever I need to. Keep in mind that a lot of the times things that you might want to collect are actually hiding underneath the rocks. So this is where the obelisks come in. You can just use to blow them up and then get access to your nice resources. Now, if you're going to be looking for things like Somersloops, they're going to be in hard to reach places. So in order to get around, you can just build some ramps or ladders. That's typically what I do, and I use my parachute to fly in between high places because the jetpack tends to get me killed because I run out of fuel at the wrong time. But there's different ways to do it as well, so I am going to show you one. So you can actually use these power lines to get around as well, and then just using your zip line, you can use that to just zoom up. Make sure that you press shift to run as well in order to speed yourself up, but as you can see, this is actually a pretty fast way to get around, and as a bonus, you're actually building yourself a power network as you go. And of course, as a little bonus, you're also going to be able to collect a lot of high tier items from the hard drive locations as well. Things like aluminum and even things like fused modular frames are just lying out there. There's not going to be a massive amount of them, but this can actually speed up your progress later on as well. So it's not a complete waste of time running around. Of course, it's not going to be a waste of time anyway, because you want those Somersloops, you want those spheres, and you want those hard drives, but still, it is time consuming, so don't feel like you need to clear out the entire map or anything like that. Just do a couple of rounds, and then once you get bored of it, continue building your factory. Speaking of which, that is exactly what we're going to do in the next episode, because by now you should have all the required materials in order to actually complete phase 3. So we're going to be moving on to phase 4. But I felt like doing this kind of intermediate episode to prepare you for that was actually going to be quite useful, because I'm going to use those blueprints quite heavily, and you also need all those other resources to kind of just boost your production along the way. So I hope you found this useful. If you're still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.